This is WPSL Port St. Lucie.
The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests of this program and are not necessarily those of station staff, management, or sponsors. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. It's time to Ask a Rabbi. Call in with your questions and comments at 340-1590. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
Hi there, everyone. This is Ask a Rabbi on Digital 1590 PSL in Port St. Lucie, WPSL. Need to put that letter in front of it. And please do feel free to give me a call anytime during the show at 772-340-1590. That's 1590 for WPSL, Digital 1590. Thank you. This is Ask a Rabbi. I am Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim in Port St. Lucie, and we're coming up on the High Holy Day season. It's actually one day. It's not holidays. It's Holy Day, and it's a season. And it's an interesting time for Jews because about 25% of the holidays happen in the 30 days that start with Rosh Hashanah, with the New Year. It's usually called New Year. And the greeting for it is Lishana Tova, for a good year. Sometimes people add on to that Umtuka, which means sweet. And that's the idea, that your new year should be good and sweet. It's not typically a new year that is celebrated with fireworks, although there's certainly some things that make people happy in it, and there's certainly rejoicing. And actually, the Hebrew does not say New Year. That would be Shana Chadasha, a new year. It's the head of the year. And there's an interesting piece on that. If you look at scriptures, the holiday occurs on the first day of the 7th month. And it's only somewhere along the line, they started changing the number of the year now, or at Rosh Hashanah, instead of in Nisan in spring, which is the real first month, the month of spring. I think that the calendar got started that way originally on the idea that in spring, when the buds are coming up and it's rebirth, that's a natural time for a new year. And if we look at other cultures, older cultures, you can always tell when a culture is older because they will measure months by moons. The word moon is inside that word month. And why would they have used moons? Very simply, you look up at night and you can tell, and it doesn't take a whole lot of months to figure out that it's about 29 and a half days, and the moon keeps going through its thing, recycles, and you can see the pattern. We're very good at perceiving patterns. And so older cultures are a lunar calendar, and a lot of the older cultures have their new year in spring. And that's a reasonable time for it. That's the spring vegetables. It's the beginning of life coming.
Well, even your animals are having the chicks are hatching, and little fuzzy bunnies are in the yard.
Yeah, love's in the air and all of that good stuff, right? Yeah, and the sap begins to rise in the trees, and there's lots of things that tell us that life is waking up and kicking off again. So that's a natural time for a new year. So how did it get moved to the fall? I'm not exactly sure when it moved. I might have to do some research and come back with that one. But we now change the calendar that time. But there's a challenge, right? Because 29 and a half days, a solar calendar, or a lunar calendar rather, is not 365 days. That's one of I always chuckle when I see that coming through from Jews. They'll say, another 365 days of this or that. No, that's a solar calendar. The solar calendar is 365 and a quarter days, give or take a few minutes. And, 2 years ago we had a leap second. So right, we know that that's not even perfect. So the way we measure time is off of an atomic clock. We measure because that's the thing that comes closest to measuring approximately to what the sun does. But the lunar calendar is different. It's 12 and a third months approximately. it's about 354 days, and you can figure out how that kind of massages back and forth. And it works out to be an average of 1 every 3 years is a Jewish leap year, and that has to be an entire month. And it is. It's done in spring. It's Adar, the month of Adar, and if the barley has not risen and the calendar is not sitting right, there's a whole bunch of different things in Talmud that tells you when it's a leap year and when it's not. And so because of a lunar cycle, it jigs and jogs by a whole month. But they had to stay on a solar calendar because the culture was also agrarian. If you're going to have harvest festivals, and many of our festivals are harvest festivals. In fact, Jewish biblical holidays have both an agricultural, a shepherd base, and a spiritual base. So there's many different reasons for a holiday. We'll take a look at that as we go on into the time today. We'll take a look at some of the different holidays and how those 3 themes braid into every Jewish holiday. But in any event, the lunar calendar does this little jog to try to keep up with the sun, because it's really helpful if you're going to do a barley harvest festival that the barley be harvestable.
Okay.
It just sort of works better, right? Yeah. And for example, Passover, Pesach. Pesach is the yearling lamb. And if you're going to have a lambing festival, it's helpful if you've got baby lambs. It just works out a lot better. What can I say?
Like a party without a guest of honor.
Can't just go to they didn't have refrigeration, they didn't have cars. And it's really, really hard for people today to understand how different life was. The closest I can come to explaining that difference, and I recommend the old Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg, for anybody who has a chance to visit there, because what the Williamsburg Foundation has done is they took that little inner piece of old Williamsburg, renovated it back, restored it back to 1774. So it's a little bit earlier, right? Not 1776. Revolution is in the air, but it hasn't happened yet. Everybody is still a British citizen in the colony of Virginia, but they're starting to talk about the things that were the cause of the turmoil. And it's set in that period. Now, yes, because they are catering to modern tourism, the buildings are air conditioned and what have you, but they've hidden that away so you don't see it.
It's like Pepsi at medieval times.
Yeah, right. Well, and I have to tell you that when I first visited there, right, I'm a night owl. This is well known to those who know me. It's not uncommon for me to naturally be up 2 or even 3 o'clock at night and then be back up in the morning. But I prefer I sleep in a little bit, not usually not horribly, sometimes horribly, but but I always wondered how it was that the people who were morning risers got control of the world. I mean, surely the night owls would have done it the night before. Was the rationale that I had. It was my rebellion against the being at work at 7:30 or 8 or the ungodly hours that kids have to be out for school buses, she said to Stuart, who's got one of those kids. And thank you, Stuart, for joining me today. But when I went to Williamsburg, I had this aha moment of, oh my gosh, the world really was different before electricity. You did have to get up with the sun if you wanted to use sunlight to do your work, right? So the average miller, tanner, even a metalsmith, right, worked by daylight hours and stopped working when the sun went down. That's where the burn your midnight oil comes from, because they would have oil lamps that they would burn. And, if you were up late, you were burning the midnight oil. And we know that a number of things were very different. People had different sleep patterns. They did something called biphasic sleep.
They didn't have TV to entertain them in the evening either. There was nothing to do but go to sleep.
Well, no, there were. Yeah, they don't have those
Video
things.
games.
But they did have a phenomenal social structure where they would do plays and dances and all kinds of entertainments every evening. There was something going on, and people would walk to them, especially when the weather was decent. Not so much in the winter, and of course that's when the nights are longest. Right, so it's hardest. But they did have like magnifying glasses and little oil lamps, and people would work under those horrible conditions, especially to do needlepoint and things like that. And it's, just boggling. But people do what they do. And we've always entertained ourselves, right? Families were bigger. It took more people to run a house than it does today. We can argue about whether or not my husband and I do a great job of running our house with a couple cats and dogs in it, but we can do it, right? You can manage everything. But in the days of the colonials, you couldn't run a house with two people. It took all day to cook the food. You couldn't go down to the Publix and go buy a ready-made meal.
Imagine keeping clothes clean.
Yeah, just everything. Scrubbing it, and all of these things were very labor-intensive. The machinery that we've put into the homes now does so much. Not to mention, you would have to go, frequently and butcher meat because there wasn't refrigeration. It's worth noting that one of the books in Williamsburg is How to Cover the Taste of Aged Meat. So let us also remember that dysentery was a common problem. And there's a lot of things when we look at how food is handled that we have to think about these things. So we have to think about tasks that people did that were daylight tasks, and all of the different things about how people lived and functioned before electricity. It's like trying to explain to a teenager what it was like before cell phones. They have no concept.
Before the internet.
Right. In my world religions class, anybody who's in this semester, close your ears. But I'll just throw out this one little piece. The last day of class, I do some extra credit work. And part of it is to view a video of an excerpt out of a Star Trek Next Generation, The Worth of a Man, if anybody wants to look at it. It's a great episode. And in there are a number of scenes where people are sitting and they've got what looks like tablets and iPhones sitting next to them. And, I chuckle when I look at that because those things didn't exist back then. They were only figment. Gene Roddenberry of blessed memory had this vision that people would have a portable digital assistant, that they would be able to do things on tablets and they would have little electronic communicators and all these things that he imagined and that we now have. And they look amazingly similar to what we in fact have. And I watch the kids in the class, and they think nothing of these things. And I'm like, this is a radically new concept when it was brought up in the 70s and 80s. People didn't have those things.
Yeah. When they filmed it, it was pretend.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't
that was
really
pretend back then, yeah.
And if you look at it, you can tell that they don't work because of the way they don't treat them like we treat cell phones and tablets today. Right? They don't understand the relationship between the body and that piece of electronics and how it functions. So the angle's off a little bit, or the way they touch it's just, you can tell they're not used to using a cell phone. And I, of course, can pick that up, and I don't know how many of the students notice that. But part of our little discussion is how has the world changed now that we have cell phones? Right? There's a reason why grandparents and great-grandparents tend to have flip phones. They don't understand this technology. It's new to them. And every step into newer technology does become more difficult as we become older. It just does. And they're used to living their lives without it. They don't understand how people can become dependent on it and really need to see it. So those are some of the things that have changed. So when we look at biblical holidays, it's important to remember that they didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have vehicles. They didn't have a lot of the, to go out to dinner was not an easy thing. It just wasn't. There were inns and there were places you could go, but not every street corner like we have now.
Well, a modern teenager would not even really understand why you're celebrating a harvest. Isn't there always food?
Yeah. Well, especially...
you just go to the store and get some.
Certainly, for most families in America, there are unfortunately still a number of food insecure people who don't always perceive food. But certainly for a good majority of the people, it is. It's go to McDonald's, go to Wendy's, right? It's right there. And I point that out to people that, some of the stories that we read have to do with what people are doing. So I bring to one of the things that I discuss in my world religion class is the story of Jesus with the loaves and the fish. Because when I discuss Christianity, that story, I bring it up. And I point out to people, think about it a minute. How many of you have snacks in the room right now? And, I'd say 2/3 of the hands go up, and what amazes me is the kids who are sitting there, drinking pop or a coffee drink or a milkshake or, munching on something, don't realize that they're even packing food, right? And I look at them and I say, how far away is food in our classroom? Right? It's usually in the hallway in a vending machine, if not an actual place that sells food on campus or just off campus. So food is very readily available. None of us are going to starve to death if we got isolated on campus somehow, right? People would survive. And that wasn't the case. In Jesus' day, you couldn't just go to the corner market and buy stuff. And in that story, no matter which gospel you open, it mentions that it's the time of Passover. And to a non-Jew, that doesn't really have a lot of significance. Oh, it's springtime. There's a lot of significance. If you go to Jerusalem today and you go during Passover, most of the restaurants are going to be closed. Because the Jewish instruction is that you can't have any old wheat in your possession, not within your borders. And so, that's one thing in your house. It's a pain. Spring cleaning, it's a pain getting everything out of the house and getting ready for Pesach. No argument. And there's actually services that help you clean up. But for a restaurant, that's a horribly big expense. So only a few limited restaurants do that. So the number of restaurants that are open during the Passover is much smaller than there would be any other time of the year. And there's not going to be as much food available in inns and things like that because they're going to be cleaning for the Passover, getting rid of stuff and, that shift. So all of that's going on. And if you know that food's not going to be likely, what are people doing? Especially parents. What are they doing? And depending on which story you read, there's, and biblical numbers are always incredible, right? 5,000 men, 5,000 women, 5,000 children, depending on which gospel you read. They're packing. They're packing food. There's no way they'd go out for a day at a time when restaurants are likely to be closed and not schlep some food. It's just going to happen. And, so I talk about that story and in terms of sacred story and how we understand the stories that we look at from then. So, what does it mean? And I can unpack that if people want me to. But that's a Jewish understanding of Christian scriptures. That's one of the classes that I offer. It's taking a look at all of these little pieces inside the story. So what does it mean in that Jesus story if people are packing food? Well, it means he's probably not doing a parlor trick, right? He's not being what were they called in New York when you used to buy the automat? Was that the
automat?
Where you'd buy the sandwiches would be in a machine.
Oh, it was an automat, yeah.
Yeah, an automat. Yeah, that was a big thing. So, right.
After the automat came Woolworths.
Yeah, there you go. And all the fast food that we've got now. So, those things weren't around, and that is certainly not I don't think what Jesus was trying to do is to be one of those. I don't think he wanted to be somebody's cafeteria. But all right, I'm sliding into that one. I don't normally do this. I'm going to go into a world religion kind of phase.
You're on the high holiday.
I'm on
high
I'm
holiday.
High holiday. High holy day.
High holiday. You have to explain that one
High
to me
holy
because it's
day.
10 days.
It's the days of awe, but
Right.
the holy day is what?
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur, right. So it's the season around Yom Kippur.
So you're saying that this is new to me, and I'm Jewish. Rosh Hashanah is not a high holy day?
It is part of the high holy day season.
Sort of like the Christmas season?
Something like that. So, right. So Rosh
That's
Hashanah.
new to me.
Well, it's not Christmas, though. Right. It's the high holy day season. It's the days of awe. Yamim Noraim is the Hebrew term for them. The days of feeling God's presence. So let's flip back to there. Thank you, Stuart. So back on Rosh Hashanah, that is the new year. And if it's the head of the year, if it's the beginning of a season of introspection, then that culminates with Yom Kippur, the day of answering with your soul. Okay? That you answer to God for the things you did last year. You've got 10 days to do your accounting for all my accountant friends. Right? You put on one column all the good things you did, and in the other column all the bad things you did. There's a great video that somebody did, a YouTube that's out there, and it shows a young person, a young man, going back through the year, and he looks at when he teased somebody and he paints a little black spot on a mirror, and then he remembers visiting an aunt who needed a visit, and he puts a little white dot on the same mirror, and by the end of his recollection, he has this big mirror. It's a huge mirror pane, and it's got black dots and white dots all over it. And he's got them neatly in little columns. And he's gone through he's parsed the year. What did he do right and what did he do wrong? And that's called a cheshbon nefesh. And in this particular video, he takes that and drops it into a river. And later he pulls out a clean one. But that's the idea of it, that you're doing this balance of what did you do right, what did you do wrong? Where does that scale for last year end up? And the idea is, what if I'm really being more bad than I think? What if that scale is tipping a little too much to the ego, to the doing things for me and not for others? This might be a good time to kind of oomph it. So you've got 10 days to tilt the scale back. It's like the ledger stays open for a couple of days to get it done.
Is it the 10 days to tilt the scale? It means like do all the good things you could possibly do in the 10 days.
10 days.
But that's not.
You're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able
Right.
to. If you've really had a year where you've, lied, cheated, and stolen, it's not going to make up for it.
So isn't the 10 days really for you to do your accounting, ask forgiveness to God for the sins against God,
Yeah.
and ask for forgiveness of those that you've hurt here, and that takes a lot of time as opposed to trying to do all these great good deeds that you
Or
can't
does it
possibly do
help
enough.
you in the coming year to
Well,
make sure that next year
yeah.
your columns look a little better?
Right. Well, I think that's part of it, right? How do I make the rudder adjustments in life? And in fact, to what you were saying, Stuart, is why we back up. Slichot, right, is the week before, and you start saying, "Oh, I did this and I did that." You start reminding yourself all the things that, yeah, and 5 Tuesdays I skipped filling, whatever it is, and it's going to vary from person to person what that stuff is with God and with others. But then we actually back it up even more and we say, we blow the shofar for the whole month of Elul, right, which we started in our congregation last week. We started blowing the beginning of Elul, the 29 and a half days leading up to Rosh Hashanah, the month leading up. We start blowing the shofar as a kind of a wake up. Because what we've discovered, you can't fix everything in 10 days. Right, so you back it up. So then you've got 30 plus 10. Gee, that sounds an awful lot like some other sets of numbers. And so, religions are actually interconnected, and we learn from each other, and we pull this and we pull that and make it work. So there's this idea that, you can't do it in 10 days. You need to back it up. So you start backing everything up. And that's why we're starting to talk about it. Right? I don't wait until 2 days before the holidays and say, in 2 days we've got holidays. Right? We've been talking about the holidays coming up, not enough, but but for the last 3 months, you start connecting and figuring out what you're going to do for the holidays. I've been working on sermons at least that long, and
last night we spent 3 hours working on honors.
There you go. I hope that lots of people agree to take them. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so, that's a good time for a plug. If you want to spend the High Holy Days with Congregation Eitz Chayim, please do that. Check on our website, www.eitzchayim.org. Congregation Eitz Chayim, your welcoming, inclusive, spiritual, and joyful Jewish home in Port St. Lucie. We welcome you to renew your inner Jew and join us. We are Reform Jewish with a renewal flair. We are multi-generational. We are welcoming to all. Come join us for a Friday night at 7:30 p.m. for our Kabbalat Shabbat services, or Stolen Moments on Saturday morning, where we discuss the Parsha of the week at 9:30 a.m. Shabbat morning services follow Stolen Moments, usually at around 10:30 a.m. Our address is 540 Northwest University, across from Met Stadium, and we are in Suite 102. Again, that's 540 Northwest University, Suite 102. Please join us for Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. or Shabbat morning starting at 9:30 a.m. for Stolen Moments. Congregation Eitz Chayim.
You're listening to Ask a Rabbi. Back to your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
Thank you. So I'm hoping that some of you will call in with a question for me at 772-340-1590. This is Ask a Rabbi with Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and the commercial we just had mentioned our regular Friday night services and Shabbat morning. But obviously, with our discussion of the High Holy Days coming up, the High Holy Day season and services coming up. Thank you. Yes, you're right. It's easy to fall into High Holy Days, but it's High Holy Day services. And so if you'd like to spend those services with us or at any of our events, we do start with Slichot on September 1st, that Saturday night, and then moving on into Rosh Hashanah on the 9th. Thank you. Sunday night, the 9th of September. It's always the 1st of Tishrei. I have no trouble remembering that. But please do feel free to join us. And please register on our website. And that's so that you have a name and a prayer book. It works well. A name tag. You have a name, obviously, but a name tag so that everybody else will know who you are. And we ask that you do that. And please do spend Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. You're welcome to join us for Break the Fast. And Yom Kippur is the 19th. Would have to be if the 9th is 10 days later, so it's the 19th. Is Yom Kippur, and that starts on a Tuesday evening, and it goes all day Wednesday. And we have the goats. The goats are at 3. And no, I won't tell you what the goats are all about. Those of you who've been to a goat session know what it is, and those of you who don't will have to come to one to find out. But there will be 2 little white goats floating around, not real.
You give away too much.
I give away too much. So, but if you watch us streaming or if you come, you'll see the goats moving around. They'll be there for Rosh Hashanah.
I thought the goat service is not streamed.
The goat service is not streamed, but before that, they're sitting in the sanctuary waiting. They're waiting patiently
and they're
for their
not
time.
doing their business and having to go outside.
They're very, very well trained.
Better than me.
They're very quiet. They don't bleat. They don't bark. They don't need a litter box. It works well.
would this be a good opportunity to discuss the cost or lack thereof of High Holy Day tickets?
Well, first of all, we don't do tickets.
Well, I know that.
We don't do tickets. And we do expect that people will make a donation. One of the things that's unique about our congregation is that we use what's called the Heart and Pocket model. And you're right, this is a good time to talk about that. Heart and Pocket means that you know and we know that a congregation needs to pay rent, it needs to pay electric, it needs to pay all these different things to function. And it has a huge budget of things that it has to pay for. And so you know that, we know that. You know it's not free. We know it's not free. But we're not going to treat you like children and hound you and say you have to pay X amount. We expect that you're going to put, if you want to see a Jewish community vibrant and powerful in the area, that you're going to help support it in an adult way. So you're going to look in your heart and see what your heart wants to give and have a negotiation with your pocket as to what's really an appropriate amount. And we will accept the negotiation of your heart and your pocket, and whatever amount that is, that's what we expect you to be able to commit to. So we look for a commitment from all of our members. It's not free, it's not costless, but the amount is not prescribed, and because different people can afford different things. So we understand that. And we're not going to look at your, 1040s. We're not going to, make you come up in front of a committee and beg for whatever. We're going to expect you to be an adult, and we're going to treat you like an adult. So that negotiation is handled privately with the folks in the congregation who can do that. And so that's the Heart and Pocket model. And I just had a question flash up here that says, what about the expo? Okay, I'll go ahead and quickly do a blurb on the expo.
Before you do that, can I say one other
Sure.
thing about the High Holy Day season?
Yes.
Another thing about our temple is you're not going to be turned away, A, because you don't have tickets, because we don't really do tickets, or although we really do want you to register, you're not going to be turned away even if you're not registered. But we'll handwrite a name tag for you. We welcome you to come whenever that choice is made, even if it's made 10 minutes before the service and you got to get in the car and rush over there. We're happy to have you. So nobody's going to be turned away because they didn't prepare in advance. But we still do expect, as the rabbi indicated, that you will act as an adult and do what you can deem appropriate and what you're able to do in terms of helping us to keep the synagogue running.
So, and we do appreciate that. So there was a question about the expo, and for the expo, I'm going to say go on Facebook, go on the website, eitzchayim.org. Both of those places have vendor registration forms, and you also can get a hold of Brian Yatkowitz, and I don't know his number offhand. I will have that next week. I probably need to have that handy from now on. But if you look on those two places, Stuart's looking it up. Thank you. Brian is our chairman for that event, and he's the one who knows all the answers to all of the questions you might have. Have we figured it out yet? We do have it. Okay, it is 732. That's 732 is the area code. 397-9134. Brian. And you can tell him Ask a Rabbi sent you. There you go. So if you'd like to call in with a question about anything, and we'll start talking a little bit more about the High Holy Day services. And it starts with Rosh Hashanah. We offer first evening services, first day morning services, and we offer second day morning services. So please do join us for any of those. And on Yom Kippur, as I mentioned before, it starts the evening before, again at 7 p.m., and runs all the way through the day. I don't even leave the building, other than maybe a 2-minute walk in the parking lot and right back in. So it's a day, there's activities all day long that go from one thing to another. Yizkor, I think, is at 5, if I remember correctly.
I believe so.
Yizkor is an interesting piece. There are 4 times a year that we can say Yizkor services. One is at Yom Kippur. Yizkor is where we remember those that we have loved and who are parts of our family that are no longer living, that are no longer with us. Yizkor, you shall remember. And so it's a memorial service to celebrate their lives and to do that in a very special way as a community. And that takes a little bit of work to do that particular ritual. And so we can do it 4 times a year. We do it at Yom Kippur. We do it at Sukkot, which Sukkot starts on the 15th of Tishrei, which if you do the math tells you that it's 5 days after Yom Kippur, not counting the one day of Yom Kippur itself. It's 4 days, which is why usually Orthodox families or those communities that are of the tradition will start to build the sukkah right after the break fast. They'll go that evening and start to actually put it up because you've only got a couple of days to get the booth up. And Sukkot is the festival of living in booths. So that comes right after. So we've got Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and then we've got Hoshana Rabbah, Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah. Lots of holidays. Kind of jammed up together.
May I make a comment about Yizkor?
Sure.
The way a rabbi in our congregation does Yizkor is something, if you have not joined us before, you will have not seen, I promise you, ever. I have belonged to many congregations in my life, and usually Yizkor, as moving as it is read through the prayer book, and you do the prayers, and that's Yizkor. We do it a little bit differently.
And we don't stream it.
Right, we don't stream it because it's very personal. The prayer book is certainly used, and I won't go into the details, but we ask that people who are coming to Yizkor, and the next one obviously is during Yom Kippur, bring one or more mementos of the people that they are saying Yizkor for, those that have passed and that they are remembering. And these remembrances, you'll get them back at the end, I promise. These remembrances are put on tables at the front of the synagogue where everybody is able to look at all sorts of things, from a watch to a wallet to a talit to a picture. And there's an opportunity, because we're still small enough, thank goodness, where if you desire, you have an opportunity to briefly say what it is that you have brought and for whom you are remembering and what it is that they meant to you. You don't have to, but you have an opportunity. I can tell you the very first time I had a Yizkor like this with Rabbi Lobb, and all the way through the times I've had it with her, and I am sure this coming Yom Kippur as well, there will not be a dry eye in my eyes, and there are very few dry eyes within the members of the congregation, because it is an experience that is intended to be moving, and the way Rabbi Lobb has organized it, it is about as moving can be. And so if you are really looking to dig into your heart and your soul and remember somebody, try us. I guarantee you'll be coming back.
So Yizkor is one of those times that, yes, again, we ask you if you would please make a reservation. Part of the reason for needing that for Yizkor, as Stuart mentioned, is that there's a special way that we conduct the ritual, and the size of the table depends on how many people we expect to have. So the space that we create in preparation for the ritual. I will share with you that it has been done in front of congregations that number in the hundreds. So it can be done. There are some things that we change slightly from the way that we do it, since we're still relatively small. And but we won't lose it even when we get bigger down the road. So it is a very powerful ritual. We can do it, as I said, 4 times a year. Yom Kippur is one. Sukkot is the second one. The third one is Pesach. We can say it on the end of Pesach, and then on Shavuot in the summer. So there's 4 times a year that Yizkor is said, and we start out with an allegory that reminds us that the barrier between the living and the dead is not a brick wall; it's a window, and sometimes that window can be cracked. And so
Sometimes when you least expect
sometimes
it.
when you least expect it, you're right. And so different things can happen at different times. So we've got a whole raft of activities coming up, starting with Slichot on the 1st. Excuse me. And this is a good time to mention also that since the second day of Rosh Hashanah falls on 9/11 this year, the year that it happened, it was exactly 1 week before the High Holy Day, before Rosh Hashanah, before the High Holy Day season got kicked off. But this year, 9/11 overlays the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and so we will be doing a special piece for 9/11 incorporated into our Rosh Hashanah service. So if anyone would like to come for that one, please register for it as well. I don't think that the website mentions the special service, but it's mentioned a couple of places, and we'll probably be getting even a little more publicity out on that. But we do want to remember the folks and everything that happened in 9/11. It's definitely a time for our country's memories to focus, and it fits with the theme. So we'll be doing something very special for that on 9/11. 9/11 starting at 10 o'clock and in that service. So that's a little bit about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Sharon will talk. Sharon's asking, does she need to learn something special for it? But you might want to brush up on It's a New Year. That was a beautiful piece that we added 2 years ago and liked it so much we did it last year as well. Lots of things that we'll be doing. And I think it's going to be an exciting time for people. I hope so. I hope that people enjoy the services. They're meant to be meaningful. They're not meant to be morose or anything like that. The two things that are not going to be streamed, as we mentioned, are Yizkor and the goats. So you have to come. So, excuse me, and move into that space. So, the rest of the holidays, I'm not even going to be able to get close to touching it with only 12 minutes left in Ask a Rabbi. So please give me a call with a question that you might have at 772-340-1590 on WPSL Digital 1590 right here in the St. Lucie County in Fort Pierce.
Treasure Coast.
Treasure Coast.
Yeah,
there you
that
go.
makes it easy.
Yep. There you go. Treasure Coast. I like that. And this is as good a time as any to do our plug again for the expo on October 7th at the Port St. Lucie Civic Center. And that is Sunday, October 7th from 10 to 3. The public is invited. Vendors are invited to get a hold of Brian. There's still some tables left, so please do join us for that as well. So I think just real quickly, let's touch on what the congregation's all about. Congregation Eitz Chayim, your welcoming, inclusive, spiritual, and joyful Jewish home in Port St. Lucie. We welcome you to renew your inner Jew and join us. We are Reform Jewish with a renewal flair. We are multi-generational. We are welcoming to all. Come join us for a Friday night at 7:30 p.m. for our Kabbalat Shabbat services, or Stolen Moments on Saturday morning, where we discuss the Parsha of the week at 9:30 a.m. Shabbat morning services follow Stolen Moments, usually at around 10:30 a.m. Our address is 540 Northwest University, across from Met Stadium, and we are in Suite 102. Again, that's 540 Northwest University, Suite 102. Please join us for Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. or Shabbat morning starting at 9:30 a.m. for Stolen Moments. Congregation Eitz Chayim.
And you're listening to Ask a Rabbi here on WPSL. Back to your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
Hi, everyone. It is Rabbi Shafir Lobb. Please give me a call at 772-340-1590. So we were talking a little bit about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I don't think we're going to get out of those two holidays. Somebody in the studio here was
Well,
just...
it is 10 days of awe.
That's true. It is 10 days of awe. And somebody in the studio said, well, what about trumpets? And I said, well, we do blow the shofar. In fact, the shofar is a big part. There's three, excuse me, 3 different parts to the shofar ritual. And, what's the shofar about? And it is an awakening. It is actually sounded at the beginning of every new month. All right, there's a piece in the scripture that says, "Tik uba shofar," right? Sound out on the shofar, let people know that it's the new moon. And of course, if this one's the head of the year, it's the biggest new moon. And so there's 3 different themes, and we use the Tfilat Halev prayer book series, which is patterned similarly to the URJ New Machzor, in that it breaks up the shofar service into 3 portions at 3 different parts of the service. And I am told that we have John on line 1. John, hi there.
Hello, how are you?
I am great. How are you?
Oh, it's very good, thank you. I grew up in a mixed neighborhood, and when I was a boy, about 10, one of the merchants taught me to say something in Yiddish, and what it meant was that the dead should pray for the living. Have you ever heard that said? I don't know whether it was a prayer or a request or just a saying. That, in other words, the dead are, I don't know how to interpret it, but maybe in a better place or better off, and the living still have to, deal with life and suffer. Does that sound familiar to you at all?
It does, and yet, right, the idea of Kaddish is that the dead can't say that prayer. The dead can't pray; they're silent.
Okay,
Right.
well,
So but it's
it was a lot of years ago.
yeah. No, I understand. And there's an old saying: "This is 2 Jews, three opinions."
Yes, I've heard that.
Right. And so part of what you're talking about is that there are a variety of different streams inside Judaism. Some of them are a little more into the idea that the dead are sitting around a table with God having a discussion, and if that's the case, then surely they can open their mouth and say something, or however it is that words function in that plane. And Judaism doesn't have any specific teaching about what that's going to be.
Perhaps it wasn't meant to be literal, that it was a hopeful thing,
Right. I think that's, Judaism does teach that the soul is eternal and returns to God.
Yeah.
But we stop there. There's nothing official as to how and what that means and how it's defined.
Yeah.
And so, if you stop there, there's a whole raft of interpretation.
Yeah.
And there's an old saying in Judaism that says, find the rabbi that resonates with you. It's kind of like find the lawyer that, never mind. I can't avoid teasing him. He's sitting right here. But and you interview, right? So that's the procedure. You interview a rabbi and find out if what they teach and what they believe matches what you want it to be. There's a lot of room inside Judaism for a variety of opinions.
I have been called a goy mit a Yiddische Kopf.
For those who don't know, that means a non-Jew with a Jewish head.
Yeah. I've got to meet someone at 12, so I'm going to cut it short, but I'll be listening to your program again, I assure you.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you so much for calling in. I really do appreciate that. If anybody else would like to take advantage of the last 5 minutes of our show, please feel free to give me a call at 772-340-1590. And if you don't call in this week, you can call in next week, because we'll be here again at 11:05.
Now, along the lines of what he asked you, when my mother passed away, someone told me, talk to your mother and have your mother pray for you. Have your mother pray for your family, your children. Ask your mother to pray, talk to the big guy on your behalf. So somewhere,
it's intercessory prayer, and there are groups that believe in it.
Okay.
I would. So, do I ever feel the presence of my parents? Absolutely. Absolutely. Can I hear their messages? Sometimes I think I do. Does that make me crazy? Probably. Do I really care? No. Right. So those are the short answers to those questions. But I'm not going to tell somebody who tells me that that's all just, this little synapse in my brain firing and making me think that that's fine. If that's what they believe, it's not going to hurt me for them to have that. Nor is what I'm going to do going to hurt them. We are invited to feel their presence. Some groups do practice intercessory prayer requests. I know a number that do. But Judaism itself says the dead are silent. Now, again, what does that mean? It can just simply mean they're not going to get up and sit at the table and have a discussion like we're having a discussion about Ask the Rabbi. Mm-hmm. Right? But it doesn't mean you might not hear the message. And certainly God knows what's in their souls. And their souls are doing whatever souls do when we're done with this experience. Mm-hmm. And that's left to interpretation. Scriptures doesn't really say anything about it. Does not say a word about what any of that means. And even as Judaism moves more into an eschatological phase, an end of days, and more discussion about a world to come, it still is left fairly nebulous and pretty much up to the individual to figure out how to use that. In the canonized scriptures, it's not there. There is no reference to it. The closest you get is Jacob on his deathbed sits up and he's, what the text says is that he plans to tell his kids what's going to happen at the end of days. But that's not what he does. He gives them these really weird blessings instead, and utters a really interesting little prayer of what will become of the dreams, and leaves it in that nebulous place. And Talmud actually has this does leapfrogs and head turns and goes crazy with this because he's going to talk about the end of days and he doesn't. And so they say, one of the angels came and plinked him on the head and said, "Stop that. You can't do that." It's left into the white space. Right? We're taught that Torah is black fire on white fire. The parchment is white fire and the letters are black fire. And, it's not meant to be taken literally. It's meant to be a fire in your soul. And so, as Stuart has heard me say on more than one occasion, it's a matter of taking scriptures seriously and not at some finite literary way. But you have to take it at the deeper, all of the different levels of meaning. And with that, I know that we're coming up very, very close here to the end. How many seconds have we got?
About 30.
About 30 seconds.
Yes.
So this has been Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim. Thank you for everyone listening. Thank you for everyone who called in. Ask a Rabbi.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.